But I see three pillars for continued growth of the sport. Pillar number one is the construction of all these new indoor facilities. I'm projecting that we'll have about 700 new facilities in 2025. The second big growth in the sport is going to come from the youth, from high school and college in particular. And then finally, what we've already talked about, the international market. That has the ability to, double the number of players we have playing today easily.
Hello, I'm Paul Olson. I'm the host of The Future of Pickleball on Selkirk TV. This is the show where we get a chance to talk to the people that are making this sport what it is, that have created it, and really are making it into the future. Today, I've got one of the OGs, David Johnson. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Paul. It's great to be here.
It is. We throw the term OG around casually a lot of places. I have a little bit of a modifier that I do. I call it BC and AC. So if you're a BC guy, you were around before COVID. And if you're an AC guy, you came in after COVID. And then I have a unique classification of people called LBCs. And that's long before COVID. And that's where David Johnson comes into the equation. I want to just take a moment and give people an idea as to who this man is and what he has really done in the sport. He created, in the earliest days of pickleball, a company called Pickleball Central that was quite a phenomenon and became quite a thing. How did you, David, go about figuring that out back when pickleball was tiny, 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 tiny?
Indeed, Paul. Back in 2006, my wife, who became a co-founder with me of Pickleball Central, was looking for a gift for her mom, who was a pickleball player. And she went online and really didn't find anything. So we were both working jobs, but we decided, well, let's hire a graphic designer, do some designs, put them up, and see if they sell. So we were, doing T-shirts and that type of thing through a third party. And it started taking off. And we just continued to grow as the sport continued to grow. And we moved from T-shirts into putting our own website up. So that was our first effort, really, to have Pickleball Central as a site that would resell pickleball paddles and pickleball balls and that type of thing. We originally started out having Pickleball Inc., the original equipment manufacturer, drop ship products for us. But then eventually we brought it in-house. And by that, I mean into literally our house. Mm-hmm. And we got to the point where we had the employees coming into the house 6 days a week. And our daughters took over our master bedroom. And my wife and I took over the dining room as our bedroom. And for a period of a couple of years, we were working out of our house, bringing in more storage to hold product. That type of thing, and just grew it to where we could move in to a larger warehouse, and then to a larger warehouse 5 years later, and then an even larger warehouse 5 years after that. So we got in early, and we were able to ride the waves.
Now, as you describe, kind of seeing this little bit of a need. At what point did you come to realize, and were you able to grow and scale the business? Because it got quite large. Was that all, were you able to do that? Did you have to bring partners in? How did you go about making that business ultimately to the size it was before you sold it?
Yeah, I was an entrepreneur pretty much all my life and loved being an entrepreneur. we were able to bootstrap the business. We did not bring in any outside investment whatsoever. We did bring a partner, Edward Hector, in, who was instrumental in helping us grow the business. But no, we just bootstrapped our way, figured out how to do it, watched cash flow, and able to build it up and actually do a couple acquisitions. We acquired that original equipment manufacturer, Pickleball Inc., and we acquired Pickleball Tournaments that did the software for all the pickleball tournaments back in the day.
So then it is, as we went along, and what I really wanted to do in kind of covering some of this early stages of your involvement is to really give people a perspective on what your background has actually been. Because one of the things that I see a lot of in the people that I interview is very often I'm talking to somebody who came in AC after COVID, but they saw the phenomenon, they recognized that something was going on, but you were really there and helped really drive an awful lot of what we see. I can remember when pickleball tournaments that was where everyone in the country went to see where you would find an event. Well, did it fit your schedule? What was the timing? What were the costs? How did that come about? Now that's Melissa McCurley, I think, isn't it?
That's correct. Melissa and her brother at the time owned Pickleball Tournaments. They had bought it from the Laniuses a number of years earlier. And it was at the point where they needed some additional resources and assistance to continue to grow the software product. It was kind of older technology. And so we were able to come in and help jumpstart that, hire some additional developers, et cetera, to try to move the software forward.
So the thing that's interesting to me in looking back and having been in the game and watching all of this stuff occur and go on is it kind of really brings us to date where after you sold the business and you sold it to the Dundon Investment Group, you've begun a consulting firm and you're doing the premier business newsletter that exists in the sport. Anybody that's in the interests of business in pickleball, if you're not following David's newsletter, you're making a mistake, and we're going to have him give you some direct access out. I'm a subscriber to his newsletter. It's where I go when I need research, when I need data, when I want to be in a standpoint of making sure I'm correct in a position that I take or asking a question that might be kind of on the edge. So David's site. Now, tell me about the consulting business first, but then I want to come back to the newsletter itself. When you got into the consulting side of things, what's the strategy there? What's the objective?
Well, to be honest, I had retired and spent about 8 months, doing the retirement thing, and really missed being in the midst of the pickleball industry. So I just sort of hung my shingle out to folks that wanted to take advantage of my experience, my connections, my Rolodex, that type of thing. And I did a limited amount of consulting for companies you've heard of and companies you haven't heard of in the pickleball space. And I continue to do that. I have some longer term clients, and then I do project-based consulting where I'm able to come in and at a strategic level, generally help a company out in the pickleball space. I also talk to a lot of pickleball entrepreneurs. I'm happy to schedule a call and talk for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, just to figure out what people are doing and give them some unsolicited advice for free on the call. And I've probably done over 100 of those calls, from pickleball dating companies to paddle manufacturers to companies overseas that are trying to figure out what's going on.
When you mention paddle manufacturers overseas, one of the things that's such a hot topic as we sit here in the first quarter of 2025 is paddles and how they perform and how hot they are. That's a relatively new thing in the pickleball space. What is your perception of where we're at as an industry with paddle standards and compliance and that sort of thing?
Well, I'll go back to the long before COVID role, if I can, and let you know that there were actually a number of paddle controversies very early on. There was a paddle that came out with foam in it out of Canada. I think it was called the A-Pike paddle. And it created quite a ruckus within the industry. And it actually got banned. And this was, 12 years ago, maybe something like that. And there have been a couple other minor ones over time, but it's really seems to have come to a head here in the last 6 months, year. We have, dueling standards out there, at least at the pro level, confusion about, what exactly the baseline for the standard should be. What are we trying to do? Are we trying to protect the sport? Are we trying to allow some innovation? Is it a combination of the two? We're feeling our way, I think, through the various organizations to figure out how far we want to allow the innovation to take the actual product.
So as an LBC member, long before COVID, what is your take? Where do you think the sport should be going, or what the best interest of the sport would be, rather than worrying about somebody's specific self-interest? Where do you see that?
Well, I definitely side towards keeping the standards as close to the spirit of the game as it's evolved in the early days, right? Pickleball has become a sport that grows significantly anywhere it's introduced. And it's because it's an easy sport to pick up. The 8 to 80 age group that you hear talked about with pickleball, you can pick it up at any age, etc. I think it's really important that we keep that in mind, because that's what's driven the sport. That's what brings the majority of the players in. I suppose at the higher level, at the pro level, if we're going to see some changes there, I'm okay with it as long as it stays at the pro level. But I really don't want to see too much dribbling down into the rec level, where the power or the spin overwhelms the spirit of how the sport was created and grew in the early days. So, I'm an oldie but goodie in terms of that.
Well, that's interesting. And I hear from most of the people, or from many people who have been around the game a long time, that had seen its enormous organic growth just based on the merits of the game itself and how it served the public. One of the things that I was lifelong in the sporting goods industry, and when you get into branding and sponsoring of pro players, the whole ROI, it seems to me, on that is that the pros end up driving the products that the consumer wants to buy. And that's where I'm conflicted in terms of how we can have a separate set of rules for the pros and how it actually serves the manufacturers that are paying serious money to sponsor players, if the pros are playing with something that is known to be different than the things in the amateur everyday game. Does that make any sense to you?
No, I think it's a fair counterpoint to that. And there are, big economic interests at the pro level that are able to drive certain directions that maybe a lot of people don't agree with. But the pro level does generate a lot of visibility for the sport. It does help grow the sport by introducing it to other folks, et cetera. So, where do you draw the line? How much do you allow the pros to have something that's bigger and faster and better than what the rec players can play with? There's also, I think, a limit to how effective the pros can respond as the paddles start to push a certain limit, right? I mean, your hand speed can only go so fast, et cetera, if the ball is coming back. So, I think that's going to be a limiting factor on the upper end to a certain extent. But I think it's a fair point, Paul, that, do you want the pros playing with something that the general public can't get? I think it happens in tennis and, a variety of other sports. And the powers that be might push it to go that way. But overall, I hope we continue to just keep the spirit of the original game in mind for the vast majority of the players, so that everybody can go out and continue to enjoy the sport without it becoming too competitive.
Very nice. Very nice. No, and actually you're leading me into what was going to be my next series of questions, and that is, given this insane background you've had in the history of pickleball, not the very early origins, but certainly the modern variation, and you've seen it all come both from an equipment standpoint, from a tournament standpoint, and from an overall business standpoint. I want to talk a little bit about how you see the trends that might be coming up going forward. We were just talking about equipment. Do you see particularly paddles, do you see any trends that you think might be coming or might be varying or changing, or do you think it's pretty much been established and now we're just going to work it out on a minute improvement basis?
I think that it will tend to be in smaller increments that we see changes. Probably we're going to see behind the scenes changes in terms of the manufacturing process. Can they make paddles that stand up and hold up longer because of the way they're manufactured? In the early days, we actually tried to make our own paddles, and it was quite a challenge. And I'll tell you that the biggest problem we had was finding the right glue to keep the edge guards from falling off. We were one of the first companies to utilize U.S. manufacturers of the big sheets before they're cut into paddles. And we learned a lot because, they hadn't done pickleball paddles, and we needed to put extra adhesive, for example, between the core and the paddle because they were delaminating. So I think that the manufacturing processes are getting more sophisticated, and I think that the materials that are being used will probably change a bit over time. But if the testing is really focused on how the ball comes off the paddle, and we use that to keep the game in the spirit, I think we'll be fine. But it'll be sort of built into the paddle that you'll be seeing the forward changes being made.
And so now on that order, when we look into, you and I have been around this game, you longer than I, but it's been very North American centric, U.S., very strong in Canada for quite a few years. But now that the sport's going global, how do you see the trends that will come around because of the expansion of pickleball globally?
I think it's going to be huge. I don't think people realize the tipping point that we're at or coming to. We were looking 10, 12 years ago at, could we afford to put somebody in Europe to help establish Pickleball Central in Europe? And we came very close to hiring somebody, and at the last point sort of pulled out and said, we're not quite there yet. And so we, been keeping an eye on what's going on internationally for a long time, trying to figure out when would it change. And we've really seen that in the last, I'd say, 12 months, the growth of the sport. You hear about it in India, and you see all the leagues and the tournaments that are taking place there. They're building new facilities all over the place. You're seeing in Malaysia and Vietnam and the Philippines the same type of growth. And then you've got China, which is going to be just potentially a real game changer. The Chinese government just recently gave the rights to pickleball to the Tennis Association. There were, as I understand it, there were two associations that were kind of fighting to be the governing body within China, and they just assigned that. So I think you're going to see a lot of government support in China for the sport of pickleball. We're already seeing a lot of growth with tournaments and that type of thing. So it's going to be huge. It will be interesting from a number of standpoints. You will start to see more players internationally play in tournaments in the States where they can compete with sort of the traditional American Canadian players, and start to really, be successful at the pro level.
Sure.
You will see a lot more travel tourism, pickleball tourism taking place, where people go to the Caribbean or go to India or Vietnam to play pickleball and experience a different culture while you're doing pickleball. And then the equipment manufacturers, I think, really need to start paying attention, because if you are going into a country like China or India that has a pretty significant manufacturing base already, they're going to have a huge advantage, because they have the price advantage, they have the cultural knowledge, they have the infrastructure knowledge within the country. And so the well-known U.S. brands are not going to have some of the advantages they have in North America. And they're going to have to figure out what their strategy is and, how aggressive they want to build their brand internationally, and how successful can they be if they're competing against endemic manufacturers in these various countries.
Do you think that that could lead to the possibility of licensing programs where you have highly established brands in pickleball, but now overcoming some of the sourcing challenges by doing it through licensing to a foreign entity?
I think you might have some companies that look at that. I think the larger U.S. brands and the brands that we've seen come out of tennis, like Wilson and so forth, probably don't want to give up that kind of control. It can get messy. You license early because it seems like it's easier to do. But as it grows, it becomes harder to extract yourself from that relationship. And so it's a bit of a roll of the dice, I think, if you go the licensing route. We might see some mid-tier companies go the licensing route because they just don't have the resources to go all in internationally. But by licensing, they can have a brand presence and, sort of leverage the resources that the licensor has.
So in my next question in terms of trends and direction in the sport really are it's sort of the core finance side of it. As somebody who's been very heavily invested in the pickleball sport in the U.S., we've got global investment groups starting to look at the sport and how it will grow investment wise. Where would you expect to see that start to show itself first and earliest?
The global investment funds?
Yes.
I think that you will see a bit of them continue to invest in the U.S. and North American market, particularly in what I call the pickle tech market, right? The technology. We're seeing a significant shift there with larger and larger investments going into pickleball technology companies. And I think you're going to see a shakeout where you might currently have 10, 15 software products for running a facility or doing tournament-related type software. I think that there will be a core set of winners that will come out of that. And part of that will be driven by the funding that they're going to be investing into their technology that's going to allow them to really drive it forward much quicker than they have been able to in the past. I think that you will also see investment in international technology companies. We're seeing some interesting stuff out of India and Vietnam in terms of technology. And again, how much market share they can grow internationally while the U.S. companies are trying to figure out how does their software fit internationally in different cultures and so forth. And then in the facilities side, I think you might continue to see more money going into facilities internationally, where folks are, it's kind of a gold rush to get the best locations and those companies that can put forward a cogent and intelligent plan, I think we'll be able to land some investment and be able to build the infrastructure around the indoor facilities and outdoor, but primarily indoor.
And then on that, when you're talking about technology, one of the big things that I see a lot of, and I find myself talking with people a lot about, is ratings. And there's been a whole different variety of different approaches to that. Do you think that will probably find a set point as more and more technological dollars come into the game? Or do you have any idea as to where that might go?
I have a lot of scars from ratings, Paul. When we purchased pickleball tournaments, they had just concluded an agreement with the USA Pickleball Association at the time and with a contractor to come up with a ratings program. And it was very difficult and it was very painful. And one of the problems you have with ratings is there's a big emotional component to ratings. You think that ratings are just based on data, and it probably should be and can be, but that doesn't matter if people are emotionally tied to their ratings, right? If it means that you're used to playing with 5-0 players, but now your rating's 4-5 and you can't play with them any longer, or vice versa. There were a lot of tempers that flared, and I still see a lot of that emotion in the forums and so forth today. Duper is establishing a pretty strong bulkhead in ratings at this point. They've been very smart. They were purchased by a group of smart investors, and they have really focused on partnerships and integrations with other software. And it's just going to make it really hard for anybody else coming in, I think, to dislodge them. UTR might be the one company that could do it, but they're coming from so far behind that I think it's going to be difficult. I've talked to the technology people at Duper, the algorithm people and so forth. They're very intelligent and they know, what needs to be done. But there's challenges, the emotional part of it, the data part in terms of some players have a lot of data, other players don't have much data. How do you onboard a new player? Where do you decide they should start at their rating, and how does that impact people they play with, et cetera? Duper is internationally establishing a foothold too. So if I had to put money on it, I'd say Duper is probably going to, just by default of their position today, become the ratings gorilla out there in pickleball.
Yeah, right. Another biggie around tournaments, the sport in general, even facility development, become corporate sponsorships. We've had a lot go on in the sport at the pro level. That's obviously bread and butter for them. They've got to have those sponsorships. How do you see the future of sponsorships, and do you see any of the big global brands coming in now that our sport is becoming global?
I think you will see dabbling in that. You saw the big Super Bowl commercial, right, that had pickleball as the core of the commercial. I'm not sure Michelob is going to continue to do a lot of stuff in pickleball or not, but I think that you will see folks dabbling in it to try to figure out what works and what doesn't work. Outside of the tours, that the audience size is not that big. The big brands want to have big reach, and where do you get that outside of maybe the PPA and the APT? And even their reach is tiny compared to most other sports that are out there. So I think the fundamental question is, does pickleball become more of a spectator sport that you see on TV or streaming, or is it already starting to plateau because it's more of a spectator sport and you just can't build it any bigger Well, it'll incrementally grow, but it's not going to grow, I don't think, in leaps and bounds to the size that starts to appeal to those big brands that want to throw millions of dollars at a time against something.
It's interesting when I get an opportunity to talk to somebody like you. I have some personal observations, having been through a lifetime in tennis and playing it at a high level, but also viewing it at a high level many, many times. Are we limited in pickleball because our facilities for hosting big events is too primitive yet? Sometimes I look at what the costs are that people are expected to pay to go in and see a pro event, to sit on an aluminum bench without a reserved seat. And I've wondered to myself, I'm really looking forward to seeing the Fort develop in Fort Lauderdale, to see if that type of facility, we've got a huge facility that is still on the planning stages in Scottsdale, Arizona, called Pure Pickleball, that looks like it could be monumentally game-changing. So I wonder to myself if we're not facility limited with our ability to offer a premium sports spectator experience. Does that resonate with you at all?
Not from the streaming or video standpoint. I mean, I think the facilities we're in are reasonable for doing a good television production. There can be improvements, but PPA in particular has spent a lot of money on their, video walls and that type of thing to elevate it. The seating capacity of a facility, I don't think drives the audience on TV. I mean, you could have 5,000 people in a facility versus the 500 they have now. And that may incrementally improve the quality of the viewership on streaming, but I really don't think that's going to drive it. You mentioned the Fort and Pure Pickleball. There's another facility in Springfield, Missouri, $51 million facility that's been announced. I think there's going to be similar ones to the Fort coming. So we're going to have, a dozen of the facilities like the Fort in a couple of years, I think. And that will be great for the sport and for larger tournaments. But I just don't know that I make the connection to larger viewership.
So that being said, is there, if you were to be able to stir up your magic ball, what would be the pieces that would need to come together for pickleball to become a more successful spectator sport?
That's a really good question, because I don't know that anybody's figured that formula out yet. I know early on, when we sold our company to Dundon and we're talking to them about plans, one of the things they were pinning their hope on was having some really photogenic young stars that do really well. Well, where are we at today, Paul? Who's the top male player and the top female player in the industry, right? It's young, photogenic, good players. But you look at Annalise or Ben's following on social media, and it's tiny compared to most other sports, and they just haven't been able to provide the spark that drives the growth of the sport. I've heard other people say we need a hit breakout TV show, Fast and Furious or something that would drive the imagination of the larger audience so that they watch more pickleball. I don't know if something like that is going to come about. I know there's, limited efforts to do more docudramas and that type of thing around pickleball. Will any of that catch fire and drive the sport? I don't think that there's an easy answer to that, or I think the Dundons of the world, would have already tried that. I think they're throwing stuff on the wall and trying to figure out what moves the needle. And I think it's going to be more incremental than it is going to be hockey stick.
Yeah. All right. Well, I love having a chance to see the game. I see a lot of it on the streaming services, but I'm also in person at a lot of events. And to me, there's no comparison in an appreciation for the game when you're sitting courtside. It is just a different experience than it is being watching it on a streaming service. There was a very, very good documentary series called Breaking Pickleball that Patrick Sullivan did, and because he was shooting in a pickleball studio with 7 or 8 fixed cameras, he was able to get visuals that were the closest thing I've ever seen to being courtside at an event. So I keep looking for how we do that, and I wonder if the players and building their own brands, we need to start getting into, I think, marketing our players very specifically and really having building personalities that the consuming market can just appreciate. I see a lot of streaming services from a lot of different things, and I find that the building of individual brands seems to be magic, whether it's in the golf influencers world, even in chess, in things, and they get millions of views because they've built a very strong personality dynamic that's the foundation.
Right. So the question is, can that be done in pickleball? Is the Anna Lee and Ben model, are they maybe too uncontroversial, to generate a brand? Are they just, not figuring out how to do it? Because particularly with Anna Lee at her age and her dominance, I don't know how you can ask for more in terms of a pro player starting to build their brand. And I don't know if that's a question of the PPA needs to invest a lot of more money to market her, if she needs to figure out how to do that out of her $3.5 million a year or whatever she's making these days. I think it would all be good for the sport to see some players grow their brand and help leverage the viewership and the interest in the sport. I just don't know where that's going to come from or how it's going to be done.
All right. Well, I was hoping that you had the magic wand that you would you would be able to swing it and say, this is what we ought to be. This is what we ought to be doing. I want to take just a quick second. If you're enjoying this, hit the like button, subscribe to our show, take the opportunity to hit the notifications button so you'll get the first alert when these come out. And I want to thank Selkirk TV for creating this platform for us to be able to have these kind of conversations. This has really been a great meeting you and I are having today, David. And I want to kind of finish this up on a little bit different note. I want to kind of give you sort of a free form. What do you see from the business side of pickleball that you see the future offering in the next 2, 3, 4 years?
Yeah, I think I've made predictions that the sport is going to continue to grow, not at the same percentage level we've seen, just because, as you get into bigger numbers, it's harder to keep that going. I think the appeal of the sport that has grown it to where it is today continues to help grow the sport going forward. That doesn't disappear. But I see 3 pillars for continued growth of the sport that goes along with that. Pillar number 1 is the construction of all these new indoor facilities. I'm projecting that we'll have about 700 new facilities in 2025 in the United States and Canada. And that's driven about half by the franchises and half by the independents that we'll see. If we get 700, they average 10 courts apiece. That's 7,000 courts that we're adding, and they're indoor, which I consider to be worth, if you live in Seattle, they're worth 3 outdoor courts because of the weather up here, right? So you can play early in the morning, at night, during the rain, whatever, and have a wonderful, terrific experience. We're finally getting indoor courts coming into Seattle, believe it or not. We really don't have any as of today, but we've got 3 or 4 facilities coming online that are going to be wonderful. So the addition of indoor facilities is going to help grow the sport. And that's an area where people may make money or they may lose a lot of money. We're going to be opening a lot of facilities, but over the next couple of years, we're going to be seeing quite a few of them close down or be bought out just because The business fundamentals weren't there for where they put it or the lease rates they paid, whatever the case is. The second big growth in the sport is going to come from the youth, from high school and college in particular. You compare pickleball to tennis, and there's absolutely no comparison in the market and the dollars being spent and so forth at the high school and college level. We're starting to see college really start to pick up. It's got a long ways to go, but you're going to start to see varsity teams, and you're going to start to see bigger money coming in supporting them. And those people are going to be pickleball players for the rest of their life. They're going to encourage younger players to come in at the high school level or even lower. So we're going to continue to see that market grow significantly. And then finally, what we've already talked about, the international market, that has the ability to, double the number of players we have playing today easily. When you look just at India, China, that area. So those are the areas. And then, where are the business opportunities? I think there are some big opportunities in pickleball tourism for somebody that gets the formula right there. I think we'll see more equipment coming out that is going to be interesting. Things that incorporate AI, the volume machine that is just kind of hitting the market is really interesting as a training tool that integrates video and AI together. So I think we'll see some folks that are innovative and are able to fill some niches that are out there. It's a very competitive market in the paddle market, as you well know. The ball market, can somebody really crack the noise component of pickleball? I think they might do well. And there's companies out there like Owl and Whisper that are working on that. So I think there are some interesting opportunities still in North America and then internationally, definitely.
Very nice. Now, I made a mistake. I've overlooked something. Something that you're doing that is very critical, I think, is what you've been doing with developing the International Association of Pickleball Facilities. Tell us a little bit about, because I know there's a lot of questions going on in the marketplace about what is the formula, what's the matrix that's the solution and the answer. How are you thinking your association of facilities will factor into that?
Well, we hope to drive a lot of understanding about that market. It's such a young market. I mean, if a facility has been open for more than 3 years, it's a granddaddy of a facility, right? So many of these facilities have opened in the last 8, 10, 12, 14 months, and they just don't have a track record, which means the industry really doesn't have a track record. Interestingly enough, I co-founded one of the first indoor pickleball facilities back in 2018. We put in a 4-court facility right next to our warehouse for Pickleball Central and had that open until the pandemic hit. And we were able to experience what it's like trying to open a facility with no resources to support us. There was no data out there, right, on how should you charge for it? How should you staff it? What should a membership model, if you go that way, what should it look like? There was literally, a handful of other facilities like ours out there. So I learned from that. And when I saw this boom in the indoor facilities and outdoor facilities, but primarily the indoor facilities coming along, I saw that lack of information was still there. So we're a trade association dedicated to pickleball facilities. We want to help make them more successful through content. I just threw up some content about sponsoring courts in a pickleball facility, right? There's no data out there. How much should you charge to put a banner up on a court in your pickleball facility? So, we did some content around that. There's no data about the financials of a pickleball facility, what works and what doesn't. What KPIs should you be looking at? Is it price per player that's being spent? Is it utilization? A lot of facilities have peak periods and really slow periods, right? we want to educate facilities on how do you get more going on during the doldrums so that you can leverage. You're like an airplane. If nobody's using your court when you're open, you're losing revenue, right? Just like airplane seats that don't get filled. So how do you maximize the efficiency of your facility? Be creative, create a community, be hospitable. There's a lot of ways to go about that. So right now we're offering free memberships to facilities that have started or people that are looking at creating a facility. Normally it's going to be $500 a year, but the first 250 that sign up get it for free. So come out to our site, pickleballfacilities.org, and it's real easy to sign up, and we'll start providing a lot of great data. We've got some meetups. We're going to come down to Scottsdale in late April and do a regional meetup with facilities, and then we'll do an annual conference and trade show in the fourth quarter this year as well.
Very nice indeed. And I don't want to forget this. What is the best way for people to reach out to you in your consulting company?
They can email me at david@pickleballconsultinggroup.com or go to the website, pickleballconsultinggroup.com, and I've got information on there as well.
Perfect. All right, my last question, and I don't ever want to be a downer. Do you see anything that could get in the way of the growth that we've seen in pickleball, both domestically and internationally?
I think my biggest concern right now is the status of the governing bodies and the confusion that's there, the rivalries that are there. For those people that want to get it into the Olympics, we've got to get our act together. We've got to support, the organization I think is going to take us there, which is the Global Pickleball Federation. But they're a all volunteer, very low budget right now. I'd encourage our companies that are making money in pickleball to support these guys. I think that the USAP here in the United States needs to sort of refocus on the grassroots efforts. Canada now has more members than United States in terms of our governing bodies, and that just doesn't make sense. So, there's a lot of work that needs to go into that. We need to get harmony. We need to get people working on the same page to make sure we're not creating cross currents that slow the growth of the sport down or are detrimental to the sport.
Cool. Well, I got to tell you, I always put show notes together before my guests. It's like you were reading my show notes. You just led me right down the path, one subject after the other. So I want to thank you for that. And
Absolutely.
David, thank you so much. I've enjoyed having you on here. Let's do this again. You have such insane information. And truly, ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching this and you're in the sport of pickleball from the business side, get on David's membership. It is invaluable, the information that he puts out on a monthly basis. David, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Paul, it's been a pleasure, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.